Deciding what books can be called classics is not as easy as it might seem. They have been defined anywhere from how old the books are to if they are taught in schools or universities. These can contribute to how a book can become known as a classic, but there is a surprising amount of disagreement on the definition. Calling a book a modern classic is very controversial. Many of those who consider themselves readers of classics believe there's no books that can be called modern classics. They might be popular or well written, but they don't have the amount of antiquity or critical discussion to be included. For the classic readers, it is a statement only for selling books. The same can be considered for the term instant classic, that makes even less sense. Here are some ideas of what classic book might mean. Hello, and welcome to NDM English. My name is Nate, and these are my notes. Although perhaps never called such, the Greeks studied the works of Homer in schools. You are not considered educated, and wouldn't be educated, without including the Odyssey and the Iliad in your studies. Not only that, but for millennia, there were very few people who could even read. It has only been within the last few centuries that literacy has become part of everyday life. The push for public education has made that possible. Along with that has been an increase in books that have become part of the learning experience. What started out as Homer and a few other written works, that themselves started out as oral storytelling, has increased to hundreds, if not thousands, of books. The school and university system might be a good place to start with defining what makes a book classic. Who knows what the chances are that many books we consider classic remained published because they were taught. Despite the criticism that school can destroy the love of reading, it can also be a place where a lot of the books are introduced. We do have to be careful not to confuse classic with canonical works, even if they do intersect. The definition of canon and what it includes is rather stable, with some recent additions. These are mostly literature accepted as high cultural value to Western civilization. They include Greek and Roman classics, along with Jewish and Christian religious writings like the Bible. Why they are considered the canon is because of how they influenced Western literature, philosophy, theater, art, and music. Well-respected literary critics and universities have made lists that include these works as essential readings. One of the more influential recent defenders of the canon is Harold Bloom. He has broken the Western literary tradition into 4 ages: the Theocratic Age from 2000 BC to 1321 AD, the Aristocratic Age from 1321 AD to 1832, the Democratic Age from 1832 to 1900, and the Chaotic Age from 1900 to today. The English literary canon starts in the latter half of the Theocratic Age. In about 450 AD, the first recognized English language writing, called Old English, shows up in history. Middle English literature follows from about 1066 to 1500 AD. After that is the English Renaissance era from 1500 to 1660, and that one is broken up into Elizabethan, Jacobean, and late periods. Next is the Restoration Age from 1660 to 1700, followed by the 18th century literature, Romanticism, Victorian literature, up to the modern 20th century. The point of listing these is that if one wants to find a starting point on defining and finding classics, they must start with what is taught in the classroom. Academics pass on reading lists for study to students from one generation to the next. By using them as part of education, they are highly influential on what books and literature survive to be published and read. Of course, they have to decide themselves what to include, and sometimes reject. Many classics go in and out of vogue and are challenged in an educational setting by both teachers and students. That doesn't mean the books rejected by an educational system go away. There's more to defining a classic than its inclusion in universities. Some are so well loved that no amount of disinterest by teachers can destroy its continued classic classification. No genre can prove this more than the more recent science fiction and fantasy literature. The most popular writers of these include Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and J.R.R. Tolkien. whose writings have become part of cultural mainstay. It doesn't matter if a person has actually read their books. A person who speaks English may not recognize the names, but they more than likely know 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, War of the Worlds, or The Lord of the Rings that these authors have written. Now, these have been made popular over the years by movies to keep them in popular imagination. However, before movies, they had to survive long enough to influence filmmakers. One way to recognize a classic is if it survives from generation to generation. That is the most accepted definition, but that also doesn't always work. The 1868 novel Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, considered the first English detective novel, is relatively forgotten. Even more so, plays of Patrick Hamilton, such as Rope and Gaslight, that have become classic movies, haven't been produced or read for a long time. It could be argued they were not classics to start with, but they were loved after the era of their publication. The novel Moonstone even keeps going in and out of favor, but somehow it continues to survive. The arguments about what makes a classic book has been going on for a long time. Apparently, it started in ancient Rome with Aulus Gellius in the 2nd century. He determined that a classic is any writing that was above the common. It would have some kind of cultural relevance that other works do not possess. He formed a Roman canon of ranked significant writings. The highly respected author Mark Twain, whose works have become American classics on their own right, even gave his own definition. He, with his usual wit, said, "A classic is something that everybody wants to have read and nobody wants to read." He also went on to say, "The classics are like fine wine. My books are like water, but everybody drinks water." It is ironic that the most famous American author whose books are studied, read, enjoyed, and continue through the generations didn't see his books as classics. To be honest, why would he? He didn't like the now classic American author James Fenimore Cooper's books. He thought that author's works, such as The Last of the Mohicans, used too many words to say not much at all, and lacked realism. They were no better than pulp fiction elevated by time, because there wasn't much to compete in the new land for great literature. Another definition of classics are more than popular works. They have to be well respected for a reason. Generally, the work has above-average artistic and technical achievements. They represent the best of the time and place that they were written. Popularity didn't make them classic, but how they transcended and reached above other similar books. The plot, characters, themes, and linguistics are of significant and high praise. They can be studied and read over and over again for new insights and aesthetic discoveries. It has to say something truthful about the human condition. For the more insistent defenders of classic as a term, only the best written of literature can be included. In some ways, they are near perfection in textual form. Anything less than that is popular garbage. Some may say I am going too far in my presentation of that viewpoint, but this is a collection of arguments that have been made. There are those who say if the above cannot be said about the book, it cannot be called a classic. I partially agree, but some do take it a bit too far. A classic does go above the rest, but some books are classics because they are well made as entertainment. You might be able to get some things from it, but in the end, it's really just an enjoyment that goes from generation to generation, shared by many. Italian writer Italo Calvino is the most recent author with respected definitions of what makes a classic book. In his own book, Why Read the Classics?, he lists 14 definitions that can be used. The first is classics are what people say they are reading again, and not that I am reading. The second is the book is treasured by those who have read them and will be found a treasure by those who read them when they are ready. The third is when a book has a particular influence on the imagination or creation of an individual's character. The fourth is a classic book offers self-discovery with each reading. The fifth is that reading them for the first time feels like we have read them before. The sixth is that a classic hasn't exhausted what it has to say. The 7th is books that have a past history of interpretation leave trails leading to the formation of cultures. The 8th is there will always be critical discourse about it, but new discourse will displace the old. The 9th is that even when we know them by reputation, they can surprise us by actually picking up the book and reading them. The 10th is a book that acts as a talisman more than mere written words. The 11th is personal classic books cannot be taken lightly and will define your personality for or against it. The 12th is classic books are part of a genealogy of books that are recognized to influence later works. The 13th is the classics generate more noise than anything contemporary, but cannot exist outside of the modern. The 14th and final of Italo Calvino's definitions is a classic silently hangs in the background of contemporary, even if it doesn't fit with the times. A conversational question. With all these possible definitions of classic book in mind, what current books do you think will be or should be included? Comment below on your answer and the reasons. For writers, go back to your favorite classic books and pick out the ones similar to your own work. Think about why you liked them. Consider reading them again as a writer, picking out and making notes about what worked. Use the books as writing teachers. Try to write a story like you would imagine the author of that classic book doing. Then, when you're done with that, do the same with a different book or author. Practice with the masters of writing, and afterwards, you'll be more likely to improve and progress faster than doing it all on your own. Be sure to catch the next episodes, and don't forget to share this with others. Thank you for listening, and I hope you are doing well. Click the subscribe button and notification bell to not miss the next installments and analysis.